We have today with us Nitin Poddar, and Mr. Nitin Poddar was main counsel of the chamber, and he is also part of the core group of the chamber, and he is very well experienced as far as this subject is concerned, and I don't think we could have got any better person than Mr. Nitin Poddar. With these few words, I would request now Nitesh to introduce Nitin Bhai and then take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. Good evening, friends. I am pleased to introduce you to Sri Nitin Poddar. Sri Nitin Poddar heads the M&A practice of J. Sagar and Associates, Advocates and Solicitor. He specializes in public and private merger and acquisition, including demergers, restructuring of business, assets and share purchase deals, JVs and strategic alliances, private equity and general corporate advisory. He has vast experience with transactions related to FDI and exchange control regulation. He has advised several multinational companies on financial and technical collaboration in India and strategy options for commencing operation and consolidation in India in a cross-section of industries. He has been a part of several high-profile corporate takeovers battles, including defending hostile bids. He also has extensive experience in private equity transactions, including leverage buyout, transaction and exits. He has provided strategic and business-oriented advice to a variety of companies receiving private equity investment. Prior to joining J. Sagar and Associates, he was a partner for 6 years with Amarchand and Mangaldas and Suresh Shroff and Company, prior to which he worked with Crawford Bradley and Company as a senior associate. He is a frequent speaker at several conferences and seminars organized by leading industry institutions and chambers on subjects like takeover code, M&A and structuring of JVs. He was a member of International Bar Association, Antitrust Section and India Advisory Group. Currently, he is a member of Executive Committee of Maharashtra Chamber of Commerce and a member of Managing Council of Chamber of Tax Consultants. With his introduction, now I request past President Sri Sujal Shah to present a memento to Sri Nitin Poddar. May I now request Sri Nitin Poddar to start his presentation.
Generally, the person who brings comment should not speak about the speaker because the introduction is already done. But being a very good friend, let me also tell some of the things which are not read out. Nitin is one solicitor I have found amongst very few who understands commercials also extremely well apart from the law. So that combination maybe is a reason why he is considered in amongst one of the top M&A solicitors in the country. And another thing about Nitin Bhai is whatever he takes up with a great passion, whether it is charitable work or it is something to do with his client's work. He has a huge amount of passion and I have to learn a lot of things from him. So these are the things which of course are not mentioned in his biodata, but truly inspiring for all of us as a professional.
Friends, thank you very much Sujal Bhai for your kind words. Thank you Yatin for the introduction and Nitish for the detailed introduction. Firstly, friends, I am extremely sorry for the slight delay that has happened, and again, honestly, that is because of the entire country being under construction. So, whichever part of the country you go, I am talking of country, whichever part you go, you will find roads, you will find bridges, you will find, not that they are in the final shape, but they are under construction. And one of the sentences recently I read in one of the very good book on inspiration, they said road of progress is always under construction. So we can assume and be happy over the fact that the country is under construction and we are progressing. Friends, I understand that for a couple of weeks the chamber has been taking these sessions on Companies Act. So there are one or two slides which I have put. I believe that those also sections must have been covered, but I thought that in addition to the M&A, I must take those, at least speak out on those few sections. Normally I don't do it, but today I would like to do that. A very clear-cut disclaimer that I am also learning like you. We have learned Companies Act. I have started my practice in 89. So sometime in 87, 88, I have learned the Companies Act. Thereafter in 1990 and 91, when I was going through my solicitor's exam. At that time, the Companies Act we studied in detail. I don't know anything. So I studied Companies Act in detail. 92 came SEBI, and thereafter we all have been learning takeover code, insider regulations, FIS. From 90 we have been learning the FDI regulations in bits and pieces, and as it evolved. We have seen the transition from FERA to FEMA. We have seen the MRDP going and the Competition Commission, Competition Act coming in. So we have seen a lot of transition. Probably for my batch, this would be this would be probably the last transition on Companies Act, I believe. We will not survive thereafter. Honestly speaking, I have two ways of generalizing or mentioning my views about the Companies Act. I don't want to be critical because now it is part of our life, so we can't criticize it. And I will not do that because there is enough to criticize. But now let's accept the fact that Companies Act is going to be our part and parcel of our life. And we have to live with this for the next couple of years till such time it is changed or whatever happens. When I look at the Companies Act as such, and when I want to compare it, when I objectively try to find out what exactly has the new Companies Act done, I compare it with, on a lighter vein, in our Marathi literature, there is a writer called P.L. Deshpande. Pula Deshpande, I know how many of you know. Many of you may know. Pula Deshpande had written a small story on Panwala. The Panwala where we get pan. He compares the old Panwala with the new Panwala. So he said that the historical Panwala who was where he feels his that pan this office or wherever he operates from, it's so nicely decorated with all his bottles, everything nicely polished. He also will be in that white jacket and with tikka and everything. So he will feel different, completely pleased to see that Panwala, and he will also feel pleased to go and eat that pan. That was historical Panwala. It's typical Panwala. Now if you compare that with the recent Panwalas in the last 15-20 years, you will find these Panwalas outside the South Indian restaurant, who will sell cigarettes, who will sell medicine, who will sell postcards, who will sell everything other than the pan. You won't get the typical pan from this Panwala. You will get everything else. Now I compare the old Companies Act with this new Companies Act. The old Companies Act 1956 was a marvelous and a fantastic piece of legislation. If you go to the history of every section, and you will see that it is so thoughtfully done. Every section, believe me, every section was so thoughtfully written. The writing is so beautiful of every section. The evolution, the sequencing of those sections was so brilliantly done. Because it was honest to the corporate, to the company as such. It was that law is honest and sincere to the corporate act, the corporate company act, company as a whole, as an entity. When you see the new Companies Act, we feel that we think that it is easy. But what has it tried to do? It has tried to bridge gaps or be a bridge between SEBI, between ROC, between income tax, between competition commission, between stock exchange, between minority shareholders, investors, stakeholders. Everywhere it's tried to bridge up the gap. One more comparison I would give, that will make the life easy for us to understand what Companies Act is. If you have seen the Golden Bridge, the Golden Bridge of US, compare that bridge vis-a-vis the multiple cross bridges which you see in Japan. So this law, this new Companies Act was tried to sort of create bridges or try to connect the dots between various laws and various requirements. The prime focus seems to be
that let's find out where there is fraud. Prime driver of this law was find out where can it be misused, find out what can be done for minority shareholders, find out how to avoid misstatements or governance issues. So it is more from it's more of I would say a patchwork to patch up the mistakes or patch up the offenses which have been committed in this last couple of years. With this, friends, brief introduction, let me just take through a couple of slides. I may not elaborate, we'll just go through it quickly. Companies Act was notified, as you know, on 30th. I will not spend too much time on this. To say that the old Companies Act has served us for 57 years. In 1990, FDI policy was introduced. Major changes were brought in. Globalization, rise of information technology have transformed the manner in which business has been done globally. New businesses including IT, service sector, IT, telecommunications, banking, insurance, all this emerged. Volumes of companies, firms increased multifold, increase of FDI, joint ventures, foreign collaborations, mergers, capital raising through ADR, GDR, FCCB, increase of scams, frauds, minority protection, lack of corporate governance. Considering all this background, there was a need for the new Companies Act. The first concept paper was issued in August 2004, and thereafter we have seen the way the new Companies Act bill have been progressed, and finally we have seen it being gazetted in 2013. Now, the serious challenges, friends, one is what would happen to the settled jurisprudence under the 1956 Acts. To my mind, it will only have a persuasive value. It will have persuasive value. So for some time, we will have to go back to the basic concepts of the Companies Act. Just to take a very live example is definition of an undertaking. I think section 180 talks of transfer of undertaking. You need permission from shareholders in case it is a substantial undertaking. Now there are two qualifications to that section, but still the basic base remains what is an undertaking. So for that we have to go back to the decisions of the various high courts. There are on number of sections, there are beautiful judgments. There are jurisprudence has got beautifully developed, and that we cannot give up, but unfortunately it will only have a persuasive value. So at times we have to go back to those judgments and see whether the judgments are still relevant and to what extent we can interpret. So there will be a transition phase. Now, in just couple of years, we will have to struggle with the old act. I mean, we will have to take out the judgments of the old act because the new act, there is no jurisprudence. We will have to develop. So some time will go, friends, in developing that jurisprudence. Uncertainty and excessive delegation of powers. Now, if you see the new Companies Act, I mean, I don't wish to criticize, but at several places, wherever the lawmaker or legislature found that it is a difficult area where they can't write clear law, they have said this will be as per the rules prescribed. This will be as per the SEBI guideline. This will be as the government will decide. So around there are 300 matters. I have checked microscopically, but I'm standing to correct it on this. Around 300 areas where government have reserved the right to make rules. Now, in a way it is good, in a way it is bad. Now, see the first classic example of the CSR regulations. CSR modification, the regulations which have come on CSR, they have simply changed the schedule 6 or schedule 7. They have just simply in one sweep said, no, this is the new schedule, now get replaced. Now see, this is going to happen. I have my own reading. We really have to worry then as to what will be the final outcome. Similarly, SEBI will keep on coming with rules, regulations, ROC will come with rules and regulations. So that is going to be a bit of a challenge. I hope that at some point of time, like the FEMA regulations or like the FDI regulations. Now government comes out with every year, in July they come out with one consolidated guideline. So similarly, MCA or someone will at least at some point of time think that, look, at least if not every year, at least twice, once in 2 years or something, we'll consolidate all the changes and announce it once and for all. Otherwise, friends, it will go to a nightmare for us to follow and find out the rules, regulations, clarifications, guidelines, or verbal communications, opinions. It will just keep floating and floating and floating, and there will be no end to that. Overlap of regulatory inconsistency, CCI needs to be addressed ASAP. Now, I will take you through when we go through the mergers, the process of merger. There are overlapping provisions. There are timelines will overlap. Every regulator wants to have a say on merger and acquisition, as if the shareholder doesn't understand and as if the promoters are here to commit fraud on every transaction. Yes, there might have been cases where promoters may have taken advantage. I would assume that in substantial part of the majority of the cases, promoters or the persons in majority control would have taken advantage of the positions or situations. But that doesn't mean that every transaction need to be scrutinized by every regulator. Every transaction should be put into dark scanner. The approach is slightly worrisome. So professional bodies, institutes, colleges, organizations will have to come forward to effective implementation. And this is a classic case what you all are doing and we all are doing. I think this should be a welcome step. I will not go to this because I understand, this has been taken care of, but couple of sections where I felt that I must express myself. The first change is the welcome change is the provision with regard to transferability of securities. If it is covered in the earlier section, then just tell me, I'll skip it. Friend, this is one of the provisions which was bothering the corporate world ever since 1991, ever since the judgment of Rangarajan. In 1992, Supreme Court decided that the private agreement between two shareholders will not be binding unless that is in the Articles of Association. Now, since that time, it has taken us almost 20 years now to resolve this issue. So the first time under the New Companies Act, this section provision to section 58 says, yes, if the two shareholders are free to decide the way they want to dispose the shares. So that freedom has been given for the first time, which was so simple. In 1991, when the foreign investment was announced, or the FDI regime that we adopted, at that time, government amended certain sections of FERA at that time. Government amended certain sections of MRTP. Certain sections of IDR Act was also amended. But unfortunately, the provisions on the Companies Act was not changed. To suit joint ventures and foreign collaboration. So on one hand, in 1991, when we said that we will allow foreign investment in India, we just did not change the corporate structure, the basic premises of the Companies Act, knowing fully that every investment which is going to come to India will be in the form of a company only, and it will not be in the form of a partnership, or LLP at that time was not there. It will not be in the form of a partnership or proprietary or whatever. It will going to be in the form of a company. So certain provisions of the Companies Act will need some changes just to accommodate the structure of a joint venture we did not anticipate. So, right of preemption, right of first refusal, put option, call option. Friends, you all know, last 20 years we have struggled with the interpretation saying that SEBI came at some point of time saying this is forward contract, bad, illegal, and they will throw out. But still 20 years corporates have been structuring various forms. We have been issuing opinions on how put option, call option is valid, in what situation it is valid, in what situation it is not valid, pricing guidelines, and very recently then government has come out with the guidelines saying put option, call option is valid, subject to RBI approval again. On pricing, the RBI has again put a different spanner altogether, again leading to a lot of questions which are unanswered, whatever. But at least the Companies Act for the first time recognizes that a shareholder is entitled to dispose his shares the way he wants to dispose. So that's a good way of looking at it. Second provision is good provision of the Companies Act is the entrenchment provision. You can now amend the Articles of Association and give some rigorous provisions over and above the Articles of Association or over and above the corporate law. you can make certain provisions more restrictive. That is what is being allowed now. Only time will say, and time will only prove how far this is valid or to what extent can we go on this. Corporate social responsibility has been introduced. It covers all companies, private. I told yesterday was a detail, last week was a detailed session, so I will not dwell upon that. Then there is a board composition also. There is a change in board composition. Now again, if you see, friends, the schedule 4 of the Companies Act, which talks of the role of an independent director. If you really microscopically look, they have converted an independent director into a promoter. Because the independent director is supposed to evaluate the business plans. He is supposed to evaluate and react why the business plan has not been successful. He is required to evaluate the packages, the salary packages for the employees of the management of the company. How is the independent director going to know? For example, if I am a corporate lawyer, as an independent, if I sit on a pharmaceutical company, and if I sit on a FMCG company, if I sit on a textile company, how would I know that industry norms? How would I know what's happening in that industry? Or for example, you people as a chartered company, if you sit as an independent director, our skill set will be restricted only to the area of our expertise. But if you see the requirement of Schedule 4 makes you virtually like a promoter. Now, coming to the M&A provisions, that is covered in chapter 15 of the new company. Unfortunately, it is still not been announced, not notified, probably because the entire process has to go to NCLT, the tribunal, and tribunal is not notified, therefore probably this is not notified. Friends, basic structure of compromise and arrangement has not been changed, thankfully. But the process is undergone change. There are a couple of interesting provisions, interesting process, interesting concepts which are built in. And as we go here, I'll take you through those concepts. Again, friends, it runs into a couple of sections. Unless you really see those sections in detail, you will not be able to get the hang of the sections. What I have tried to do is I have tried to pick up the important concepts from the new sections, and we'll discuss that. Again, friends, this is a very first interpretation. So I'm open to correction, and I'm open to discussion on certain sections if required. And we have to wait and see how the law evolves on this. We have to wait and see how SEBI comes out with new regulations or guidelines, and see how it looks into it. Basically, friends, 391, 394, 393, 394, those sections now are reflected in section 230 to 235 to 37 of the New Companies Act. The concept remains same, that like in 391, parallel to 391 is 230 of the New Companies Act. If you propose any reconstruction or compromise or arrangement between company on one hand and the creditors on the other hand, or if you propose any compromise or arrangement between company on one hand and the members on the other hand, you could propose a compromise or arrangement between these two categories of people. Similarly, under 394, when a scheme of compromise or arrangement is for the purpose of a merger or amalgamation, that also has to follow the same process. So nothing really changes. The concept of compromise and arrangement between the company and members, or between company and creditors, or if a scheme of compromise or arrangement is in the form of an amalgamation or a merger between the two companies, the process remains same. Nothing changes. The basic concept remains same. So you apply to the tribunal for convening meeting of the members or creditors, as the case may be. You need to submit the documents, the latest financial position, auditor's report, certificate of the company's auditor confirming that the accounting treatment. I'll come to the accounting treatment a little later. Disclosure with respect to pendency of the investigation, reduction of capital. So everything has to be declared to the shareholder by the application. Then the tribunal will allow the holding of the meeting. most importantly, there was a lacuna in the old act, namely, whenever we propose a scheme of compromise or arrangement, question was always as to whether you need creditors meeting or not. And the various high courts have took different views earlier, and in fact there is a Delhi High Court judgment some time back which very clearly says that there is a lacuna in the process of mergers and amalgamation because it doesn't talk of a permission for or meeting of the creditors. So for the first time, and the Delhi High Court had at that point of time had in that judgment had expressed hope that the legislature will change over a period of time, and the legislature will think that it is, yes, it is necessary to have a creditors meeting also. What was the position and what was the controversy? Let me just briefly explain you. The law was silent. Section 391 is silent as to whether when you propose a scheme of compromise or arrangement between the company and the members, whether creditors' consent is required or not. So we used to go to the court, typically in the Bombay High Court, and we used to tell the court that look, this is an arrangement between the members of the company, creditors are unaffected. So court used to ask us, how do you say that creditors are unaffected? So we used to give a statement of our solvency. We used to say that despite the merger or amalgamation or compromise or arrangement, selling of, or whatever we may do, the creditors are secured. They are not financially in a bad shape. Now again, it was a subjective question always. So to overcome that, what did we do? We used to go to the creditors and take their consent. Not 100%, but substantial creditors used to take permission and file an affidavit to the court saying that, look, I have obtained substantial consent of these creditors and therefore, please pass, whoever has not given the consent are small creditors, so don't worry about that, we'll take care of that. So this was the process. Now for the first time, notice has to be sent to all the creditors and to all members and debenture holders along with copy of the scheme, valuation report, a report adopted by the directors. So the law has made first time a compulsory notice to all the creditors. Most importantly, the final change is this, in the second part. The dispensation of the creditors meeting will happen only if we have 90% in value, creditors holding 90% in value, giving their consent, and not only consent, but we have to obtain a confirmation from the confirmation to the proposed compromise or arrangement through an affidavit. So they will only, the creditors will have to 90% of the value has to approve and an affidavit to be filed that yes, no creditors will be prejudicially affected because of the scheme of merger or amalgamation. Now, one more interesting provision. Whenever we used to propose a scheme of arrangement, or amalgamation, we used to give notice to the ROC. ROC's notice was deemed as a notice to all the statutory authorities. Typically, and ROC is to, over a period of time, of course, ROC improved and ROC is to send a standard checklist. It was a lengthy standard checklist, whether it is applicable to you or not. So it was to send standard checklist and then we used to go and meet the ROC, explain them the provisions. So everything was so standardized, basically. So now the law has changed. The section requires not only notice in the prescribed form to the central government, notice to income tax authorities, RBI, SEBI, ROC, official liquidator, respect to stock exchanges, competition commission, if necessary, and such other sectoral authorities. For example, if it is a telecom authority, if it is banking, RBI again. So all those regulatory authorities need to give notices. And mind you, of course, the section also clearly says that within 30 days they are supposed to revert. Now what would happen typically, friends? We would end up in giving notices to all the regulators and they will in turn give a standard notice to you that please submit 1, 2, 3, list of documents that they will typically want and will revert to you. So there one standard letter to you saying that please submit all the documentation. They will come to the court and say yes, we have already looked into the matter and we have responded. So we have technically complied with that rule of 30 days. Now this is, friends, is going to be a nightmare, believe me, because those regulators will have to not only give their meaningful comment, but they will have to remain present in the court for the hearing time. So you can imagine today itself ROC is finding so difficult to, with several mergers and acquisitions, ROC is, they don't have that much of staff to really meaningfully go through the scheme, come there in the High Court, represent, file affidavits, object. Imagine what would happen when there will be several regulators. So this is going to be a little bit of a nightmare, though on face of it the section where it says that within 30 days if you don't receive comments, the comments will be, it will be deemed that they have consented. We also just share what example.
It's today only there was a income tax objection in Bombay High Court, but the judge being very strict, he has rejected their objection. They wanted not any specific points, but they were seeking some time for 4 to 6 weeks
To comment.
Yeah.
So, again my experience with the Bombay High Court is whenever there is a change in the company's court, whenever the company court is to change, but more than the company court, whenever there is a change in the registrar of who works with the company court, depending upon his understanding his to evolve process. Some 2 years back, fortunately, when the company registrar, I happened to know him, so, and he knew that I work more on this M&A, so he called me and he said, I want to understand and I want to really find out what is the best process. And he was really, he's retired now, but he made not only me, but he made couple of others, lawyers who are working in M&A, and he understood and he evolved a process. For example, what happens is typically that if you apply for a meeting to be convened, the orders are all drafted in advance. The judge only just initials, so the registrar has to apply his mind whether there is a scheme or not, whether the order is or not. So the initial process is all very standard. In that sense, there is no application of mind by the court. So to my mind, honestly, I always tell him, why do we need to go to even the judge? If you are involved, if you are approving this scheme, if you are approving the application, everything, you should just approve and through the judge should give it to us. But whenever there was a change in the registrar, believe me, the process has to get changed. And now I am told the process is very pathetic, and now it's very difficult, and you just can't get through the basic corrections also. Yeah. Now one more challenge is, what happens if, now the Companies Act talks of 30 days, but what happens if there is a clash of timing? Now, there is a clear clash of time with Competition Commission, because Competition Commission has 210 days period to react on any scheme of merger or amalgamation. Now what happens to that? Does the 30 days gets automatically extended? One doesn't know. Now, independently of this also, and at a later stage I'll come to that, SEBI has evolved a detailed process. SEBI, sorry for jumping here, but I need to catch up on SEBI on this. SEBI has always wanted to interfere with the mergers and amalgamation. SEBI always felt that the valuation that Sujal is doing is not correct. SEBI always felt that the valuation which is adopted by the companies is not a fair valuation, and therefore they wanted to have some say on the valuation. Now they tried their best to some other come into that, but they could not really have a say. So finally they amended the listing agreement, and I will come to that. They amended the listing agreement dramatically, and now before you go to the court, you need to go to stock exchange. Stock exchange will scrutinize the schemes, stock exchange will give their comments. I will come to that at the later side. But basically stock exchange, through stock exchange, SEBI wants to monitor, go through, invite objections from various quarters, and then give a go ahead to the schemes. Now what would happen is typically, therefore these 30 days would become meaningless. This 30 days time for reacting to various authorities would automatically become a meaningless exercise, and we will have to go by and we have to see how the process evolves. The biggest challenge, friends, today is that this will not be through High Court, this will be through the tribunal. So the tribunal members, how far I'm hoping, and I proceed on the basis that they will be quite knowledgeable people. They will understand the processes involved, they will understand the jurisprudence, they will understand how the earlier mergers and amalgamations have been approved. So I hope that they will evolve a very good structured approach towards mergers and acquisitions, and we will not end up ourselves into a chaotic situation. Let's hope only that, at least this part of mergers and acquisitions through the tribunal will be handled very systematically and independently and nicely. So this cross-checking of the scheme of amalgamation and merger through this various regulators, cross-checking is going to throw challenges to all of us, and we will need to be careful with that. Now this is remain same, where the scheme is approved by majority representing 3/4 in value. Now the challenge over here is that earlier the law 391 said majority in number representing 3/4 in value. So therefore, when you say majority in number, it assumed a physical meeting. When you talk of majority in number, it is assumed a physical meeting. But the law now requires that you can hold the meeting, of the voting can be through person, proxy, or by postal ballot. The rules I was looking at, it was just announced yesterday, so I did not get too much time to look at the rules. But the rules also prescribe postal ballot. If that is the case, first of all, which means that you have to convene a meeting and also do a postal ballot. Now, if that is the case, how would you identify the majority number, which means not only the physical presence, but also the votes which come back, we have to probably count them also, or treat them as physically present, and then find out what the majority is. Now, so therefore, the first issue about this would be that on the date of the meeting, we will not be able to announce the results. We have to wait for the postal ballots. Now again, the rules or the section doesn't make it clear whether you can adopt both or you can just go for postal ballot. So again, that is a open area where we have to see and find out what the MCA comes up with. Maybe they will come up with a clarification on this, whether it is optional, compulsory, or a hybrid of everything. This is going to be a serious, again, a problem. No compromise shall be. I am just speaking, friends, because we can't in this short time of 1 hour or 1 hour, we can't go through all the sections. So what I have just picked up the concepts, the important issues out of those sections, and which will take you through the process also as well. No compromise shall be sanctioned unless accompanied by company's auditor certificate to effect that it complies with the accounting standards. Now, this is thanks to lot of innovative and innovative schemes that were evolved in the last couple of years, which tried to juggle around with the accounting standards and accounting systems. So therefore, at some point of time, there are Bombay High Court authorities which say that even if you have passed the scheme is not binding on the income tax authority, and the accounting standards and accounting principles adopted by the institute would be binding, and you will have to go by that. So there are few authorities on that basis. Now, the law has made it clear in section 237, subsection 7. Is a proviso. It says that no compromise arrangement shall be sanctioned by the tribunal unless a certificate by the company's auditor has been filed with the tribunal to the effect that the accounting treatment, if any, proposed in the scheme of compromise or arrangement is in conformity with the accounting standards prescribed under section 133. Means essentially the auditors will have to certify, the company auditors will have to certify that the accounting treatment prescribed in the scheme has to comply with the accounting standards. Now, therefore, there is hardly any scope to my mind now to play around. Because even if you try to evolve some innovative interpretation or innovative scheme on accounting treatment, The auditor will have to be satisfied because you will have to be satisfied whether that is in conformity with the accounting standards or not. Even if you certify because of the Bombay Court recent judgment, that if the income tax authorities don't agree with that, it will not be binding on them. Now, not only was SEBI happy with this, but yesterday SEBI has issued a notification. I'm sure all of you must have seen that. It is issued to the stock exchange. SEBI has now issued a format of auditor certificate. So, you may see that this was issued yesterday. Because again, like lawyers, chartered accountants also started using English language to write the treatment the way they wanted to write, and they used to argue with SEBI or the authority that look, this is in compliance. So there was still a lot of scope for interpretation. So for the first time, SEBI has come out with the certificate straight away, a format of certificate. And I would like to believe that soon SEBI will come out with the format of valuation report also. They may give, Jitin is saying they may give format of the scheme also. So if you see that, if you want, I can read out. This is very much in your interest. I'll quickly read out to you. It says, we the statutory auditors, it is addressed, you will be addressing it to the board of directors. It says, we the statutory auditors of the name of the company have examined the proposed accounting treatment specified in clauses blank of the draft scheme between blank and blank in terms of the provisions of blank sections of the Companies Act 2013 with reference to its compliance with applicable accounting standards notified so and so. The responsibility of preparation of the draft scheme and its compliance with the relevant laws and regulations including the applicable accounting standards as aforesaid is that of the board of directors of the companies involved. So it is a first disclaimer by you. This is important for you. Our responsibility is only to examine and report whether the draft scheme complies with the applicable accounting standards and other generally accepted accounting principles. Nothing contained in this certificate, nor anything said or done in the course of or in connection with the services that are subject to the certificate will extend any duty of care that we may have in our capacity of the statutory auditors of any financial statement of the company. So you are not going to be vouching for the financial statements. It's a very good disclaimer for you people. We have carried out our examination in accordance with the guidance, notes on audit report and certificate of special purposes issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants. Based on our examination and according to the information and explanation given to us, we confirm that the accounting treatment contained in the aforesaid scheme is in compliance with clause 24I of the listing agreement and all applicable accounting standards. So all that you are going to confirm is that the accounting treatment given is in compliance. You are not going to confirm the financial statements of the company, nor are you going to comment upon the scheme per se as such. So this is the format which you have to issue going forward for the scheme.
Old SEBI circular of February 2013, not our company had taken a view that when you have a confirmation from the auditor, it applies only to the aspect of amalgamation. So a lot of, as you rightly mentioned, innovative M&A consultants had come out with a two-stage scheme. The same scheme goes to write part 1 deals with the merger, where accounting treatment is only specific to the merger. Having done that, in the part 2 of the scheme, they were doing all these innovative adjustments. Like suppose on account of amalgamation, if you have amalgamation reserve getting created, which is a capital reserve in nature, in part 2, they used to write that amalgamation reserve will be converted into general reserve. And those kind of innovations that started happening. Now with this, yesterday's format, it talks of the accounting treatment prescribed in the scheme. So it covers the entire scheme. So to that extent, anything contrary to the accounting standard mentioned in the scheme will have to be opined by the auditor. So to that extent, now that window which was earlier open or it was interpreted to be opened by some of the consultants, that part 1 only I have to confirm whether it affects the accounting standard or not. Part 2 was this entire field open, is now I think plugged through this format, because SEBI said anything
where the entire scheme is concerned, anywhere you are referring to an accounting, this certificate will have to be given. So I think a small window which was open up till now for a listed company to do an accounting contrary to accounting standard by any part 2 in the scheme is now being shut.
No, for that matter, corporate ministry has also taken step. They strictly objected to this, and there are not many schemes which have been withdrawn, what you are saying.
Where you will contrary to that.
See, but honestly speaking, I still don't know whether this is got plugged. See, this was frankly speaking not required, because there was a High Court judgment which says that accounting standard will override the scheme. So whatever you may have written in the scheme, so very theoretically, whether you give a certificate or not, the income tax had the authority, income tax department had the authority to go back to the accounting standards and say that your treatment is not correct and not valid. Now see again, just assume for a minute that you have come out with an innovative accounting treatment, which may not very strictly comply with the accounting standards, but there is an arguable case. Say you come out with an argument that yes, I can interpret. Now I am not an accountant, so I am not able to give a live example. But if you are able to interpret the accounting standards or accounting principles and justify what your treatments are, will you not certify that yes, this is in accordance with the scheme? And despite that, my question will remain is, even if you give this certificate, will this certificate be binding on the income tax? That question is going to still remain. Income tax is bound to say that look, this may be interpretation of your company's auditor, but my interpretation is different. It has only put your fraternity into some kind of pressure that you should not be adventurous. You should try to avoid adventure, and you should not. But I don't, honestly speaking, I don't see why you people will not come up with a innovative scheme or innovative treatment. If an interpretation is available to you, you will definitely want to take that advantage. Why would you not do that? So just by putting a certificate, you are not ensuring that no innovative schemes will come forward, and by putting a certificate, you are not sure whether income tax will accept that certificate and will still say yes. So long as you are certified, I will not look into the merits of the matter and I will accept whatever you have said. So that judgment of the Bombay High Court will still override, saying that it gives, notwithstanding the scheme, it gives power to the income tax authorities to say that please go through the accounting treatment the way you understand it, and if you feel this is not in accordance with the scheme, then you change the accounting treatment. So that area is going to remain open.
The whole purpose for this is like what was capital was created into a general reserve and they were used to distribute dividend. I mean, that is what has been really the aim of SEBI.
No, I'm not on this specific case. I'm not on this creation of capital or dividend otherwise. I'm generally saying that even if despite your confirming that this treatment that you are proposing in the scheme is according to the accounting standards, that is not binding on the income tax authorities. I'm only trying to say that. It may strengthen your case before the income tax authorities. See, High Court has nothing to do with this now. The High Court has already washed off its hand. High Court has given a judgment. High Court has already said that you may come up with any accounting treatment, that's not binding on the income tax. Now it is for the company to go when you have an argument with the income tax authorities, company will have a better case to say that no, my auditors have confirmed, my auditors have checked it. So to that extent only you will have a supporting argument and not otherwise. Any question on this? Buyback of securities under the scheme. Now, there is a provision in section 230. We say that no compromise or arrangement in respect of any buyback of securities under this section shall be sanctioned by the tribunal unless such buyback is in accordance with the provisions of section 68. Now, this again emerges from a couple of decisions and couple of buybacks announced by the companies in last few years. Companies is to evolve a scheme of arrangement whereby under the scheme they is to buy back the shares. I think Sterlite is the classic case where the matter went up to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, look, section 391 to 394 is a comprehensive code in itself, and it contemplates any kind of compromise arrangement, whichever manner you want to do it. So it could entail a buyback. Typically whenever we used to merge a loss-making unit or something, when there is excess of capital, we used to go for buyback or we used to go for reduction of capital. So typically whenever there was a buyback involved, and SEBI was very upset with that, honestly, because SEBI has a separate set of buyback regulations, and SEBI wants the pricing to be determined according to the buyback regulations, and SEBI felt that through this backdoor mechanism what you are doing is you are avoiding my regulations on buyback, my pricing guidelines on buyback. So now therefore this section has been introduced, this subsection has been introduced to say no compromise or arrangement in respect of any buyback of securities under this section shall be sanctioned. Now as a lawyer, I would want to interpret it to mean here that if a scheme of compromise is only for buyback, it is not permissible. But if I evolve a composite scheme which contemplates merger of 3-4 companies, and because of the merger if there is a provision with regard to reduction of capital or buyback, I would say it's a composite scheme in itself. And if I am able to justify that buyback because of the merger or otherwise, I would still be able to say that no, it is not a buyback scheme, it's a scheme of compromise or arrangement. Now because the language says, and I read out to you the language again, it says no compromise or arrangement in respect of any buyback. So you could say that my compromise or arrangement is not in respect of buyback, my compromise or arrangement is with regard to merger or amalgamation or hiving off or demerger or whatever, and as a consequence, as a byproduct, there is small amount of buyback. So it's not a very strictly buyback. So again, this provision has been introduced only to avoid the argument of that Sterlite case where where Supreme Court said that 391 and 394 is a comprehensive section, and if anyone involves a scheme which involves a buyback, I can't stop. So SEBI wanted to interfere there. Now the challenge here, what would happen is, forget the High Court. If you propose this kind of scheme which has even a small amount or small bit of buyback, when the scheme goes to the stock exchange for approval, and the stock exchange when it reverts back to the SEBI for its comments, SEBI might in its discretion say no, remove these buyback provisions. SEBI may just treat that part of this complex scheme which deals with buyback. SEBI may say just remove this, and they may completely upset the whole construct of the scheme. So that's the fear over here. But again, as I said, we have to wait because this is just the beginning of the sections. The law, we have to see how it gets evolved. For the first time, they have introduced this provision 230 subsection 11, which says that a takeover, any compromise or arrangement may include takeover offer made in such manner as may be prescribed. Provided that in case of listed companies, takeover offer shall be as per the regulations framed by SEBI. Now, to my mind, honestly, again with due respect to the legislature who has drafted this section, I don't think so they understood what they are drafting here. They just wanted to provide something for takeover offers. Otherwise, see, takeover code is a comprehensive code in itself. But when you never do a takeover offer through a scheme of arrangement or merger, because scheme of arrangement and merger, anyway under takeover regulations, any acquisition of share through the scheme of merger or amalgamation is exempted. So when you go through the court process, the SEBI takeover code doesn't get triggered. Now we have to see and wait and see as to how SEBI reacts on this. What is the rules and regulations? What SEBI, whether it amends the takeover regulations or SEBI independently comes up with its own regulations on the listed company. We have to wait and watch. But there is a provision now in the Companies Act which says that the compromise arrangement may include a takeover offer.
Is there anything to do with that Ultratech which was taken over and open offer was made when it was an unlisted company?
No, this is not, I don't think so this is triggered by that Ultratech case. Nitin is referring to a very interesting case, and incidentally I happen to be working on that merger, so I know a little bit. Just to tell you the background, it was a demerger of cement plant of Larsen & Toubro into a new company called Ultratech, which was an unlisted company, and it was being acquired by Birlas. And and because it was an unlisted company, because the demerger happened with an unlisted company, but they made an open offer to the shareholders of an unlisted company, though it was not required, strictly speaking, because it was only a demerger, a classic demerger of the cement undertaking. So Birla had made an open offer on an unlisted company. The timing was matched in such a way that post demerger it would get listed, and as soon as it is listed, that the open offer would get triggered. Now, it was done basically primarily to, give an opportunity to exit to the shareholders of the UltraTech Cement division who came from Larsen & Toubro. But no, this is not for that purpose. I think, legislature wanted to have this is a very innocuous provision, if you see, because it is neither here nor there. Because all that it says is that any compromise or arrangement may include takeover offer made in such manner as may be prescribed. So unless it is prescribed, we will not know. So it is just a innocuous provision, enabling provision to my mind. Put it in the sections so that if SEBI wants to evolve something on the takeover regulations, this could help. Maybe I'll tell you, I know for a fact there are certain cases, certain takeovers which has happened, which were structured to avoid the takeover regulations. They were structured as an amalgamation. They were structured as a scheme of compromise or arrangement, purely scheme of to avoid the takeover regulations. It was obvious that these mergers were done for the purpose of avoiding an open offer through SEBI. And SEBI also knew that this scheme of amalgamation or mergers are for the purpose of avoiding a takeover offer. So maybe SEBI wants to avoid, so like the buyback regulations, here also SEBI may come out with something, some such provision which will say that if pursuant to a merger or amalgamation, if it the impact of it or the effect of it is the acquisition of a listed company, then you will need to make an open offer. Some such provision will probably come out. So we have to wait and watch.
Some schemes, what happened? There was a scheme of amalgamation and a preferential allotment of shares, which was over and above the threshold limit under the takeover code. The companies took a view that since it is a part of the scheme under section 391, takeover code is not applicable because there is an exemption of all the shares issued pursuant to 394 scheme. I think the whole purpose of bringing this as a part of the Companies Act is to curtail those kind of practices where genuinely takeover codes were triggered, but it was given a color that it is a share issued pursuant to a scheme. So we have to be blamed for such kind of, sort of, because professionals give this kind of innovative schemes to the corporate India, that this is also possible and we can do away with the open offer requirements. In a way, it is plugging that loophole or interpretation issue which is prevalent in the earlier code.
But again, you are right, Sunil bhai, and you are absolutely right and bang on point. There were a couple of schemes, I just avoided to mention that, but there were a couple of schemes evolved to avoid the takeover code. Under the merger or amalgamation, promoters were given excessive shares through preferential allotment or through valuation exercises, whereby the promoter shareholding was increased. So essentially the objective was either to increase the promoter shareholding or to add a new promoter to the company and thereby avoid the takeover regulations. So this was the objective. Now, see, the challenge is, Sunil bhai, my friends, challenge is that we are living in a complex world. Not only complex, but we are living in a dynamic world, I would say. That is the correct way of putting it. Now, because of, in the last 20 years, because of the foreign collaborations, joint ventures, private equity investment, ADRs, GDRs, various methods of capital raising, various requirements with regard to acquisition of undertakings, acquisition of brands, selling of brands. So, a corporation will need to restructure. Now, not necessarily, every structuring that we do or every structuring which is demanded by a corporation, not necessarily, it is meant only for the purpose of avoiding takeover code. See, I don't think so, people want, I'll give you a classic example. I was acting for an MNC friend, a very large multinational corporation, and they wanted to acquire the promoter shares. And the promoter shares were, I think, roughly 65 or 60, around 65%. And promoters said, we want to exit fully from the company. Because they were obviously getting a good price. The MNC said, and I was representing the MNC, we said that we'll acquire your 65, I think 65 or 70%, it was 65, and then make an open offer for 20, at that time it was 20%, now it is 25. So we make an open offer for 20%. So if we acquire 65 from you and 25 from the public, obviously public is going to sell because the very attractive pricing. So we cross 85. After we cross 85 and having acquired 85 up to 85% at a exorbitant price, what do I do? Because the SEBI guidelines say that you have to first comply with the public listing norms, which means you have to sell 10% shares and come back to 75 percentage. And only then you can do a delisting. So we went to SEBI and we told them that look, we are acquiring 65, we will acquire 20 from the public, we go 85, immediately we want to announce the delisting. And probably delisting also will be on the same price, which is a really a fantastic price. We don't mind keeping that as a reserve price. We told SEBI that we don't mind keeping that as a reserve price, and if you feel that we should follow the buyback, the delisting pricing norms, we will follow the delisting price norms. And even if the delisting pricing norms, the reverse book building, even if the reverse book building is less, we don't mind paying same price, highest price. So we wanted to be absolutely fair from all sides. SEBI said nothing doing. If you cross 75, you have to come back to 75 and then do delisting. Which means you have to sell roughly 8 to 9% shares, and only then you can do. Now, having acquired shares at a high exorbitant price, if you tell someone that just because your regulations require you to divest, if you start divesting 8 to 9% or 10% in the market, what would happen to the pricing? And why should MNC who has come here to acquire a business be on first run itself made to suffer on a 10%? It's a huge, massive outlay of funds. And believe me friends, only on this principal interpretation issue, they said we do not wish to do the acquisition in India. I mean, they walked off, and we lost a very good opportunity of having a very large MNC in this country. And believe me, I know for a fact I'm advising them, I continues to advise them, and they have now shifted their focus to Brazil and some other countries, and the country has got deprived with really a good cooperation. Now this is what happens. So we are living in a dynamic world where it is possible the promoter shareholding may vary, and it is varying. Sometimes it is 40, 45%, 50%. There are private equity. Look at a complex situation where promoters are holding say 40, 45% and 20%, 25% is held by say private equity investors. Private equity investors want to exit. Promoters want also to exit. What do we do? So we will end up in the same situation. Now, even if you go to SEBI with some kind of solution which protects the price to be given to the minority shareholders, SEBI is not willing to look at that because SEBI treats it as they don't want to go to wrong precedent. Now, how it is a wrong precedent, I don't understand. Anyway, so I guess this provision is meant to pluck those kind of situations, but again it will depend upon what SEBI comes out with. Fast track mergers. Now, this is a welcome step because for small companies or companies with holding and subsidiary relationship, those companies, you don't need to go through the whole process of the mergers and acquisition. All that you need to do is you need to get 95% permission from the shareholders, and majority of creditors representing 9/10 in value. If they confirm, then it essentially what it means is this is prevalent in the overseas jurisdictions. You enter into an agreement for merger, and if that agreement is approved by the shareholders and creditors, the ROC approves it. Now, while yes, they say that it will be approved, but again this will be subject to various regulators, and that process is not given up. That whole process still remains, so you have to comply with, you have to give notice to ROC, income tax and everything, and subject to their confirmation, your scheme will go through. But this is a welcome step because I'm sure every company undergoes a lot of restructuring whereby the investment companies, small companies or subsidiaries, multiple subsidiaries, affiliate companies, we keep on merging. So this will be a fast track merging, will be I think is a welcome step. Now coming to the merger with the foreign companies. Now for the first time friends, I am telling you, this is only enabling provision to my mind, There lot have to be done on this. It is not a simple process what they have mentioned. What all that they are saying is that Indian companies can merge with foreign companies of a country with reciprocity and vice versa, subject to prior approval of Reserve Bank of India and subject to rules made by central government. Now what does this really mean? Let's take a pause here and understand the concept and understand the repercussions of this. All this time, it is only two Indian companies could merge with the merger could happen only with two Indian companies. The first time they are saying an Indian company now can merge into a foreign company, which means, take an example, A company, Indian company merges into a B company in US or Switzerland. So the shareholders of A company will become shareholders of the B company. Now, it sounds very simple, in fact since last couple of days I have been struggling to find out what could go wrong here and on what are the gaps. The first gap would be, if you are talking of a merger or if you are talking of an amalgamation, so the Indian company's existence will go, it will not remain a corporate body, it will stand merged into the foreign company. So what happens to the business here? What happens to the assets? How would the regulators or how would the law treat that asset? So to my mind, considering the existing regulations, the assets here or the business here would be treated as a branch office of the foreign company. Number one. Now, the minute we talk about therefore a branch office, which means it will be subject to RBI permission depending upon the nature of the business. It will need the permission from the regulatory authorities. For example, if it is a telecom company, you will need approval from the telecom authorities. If it is insurance, you will need permission from the insurance authorities, and so on and so forth. So that's first part. Now let's look at the second part from the FEMA perspective. Today under the LRS, the liberalized remittance scheme, you can send up to $75,000 abroad to acquire shares individually. When it comes to the corporates or body corporate, they can remit up to 100% of their net worth in terms of ODI regulations. So if it is individual, $75,000 earlier it was $2,000, now it is $75,000. Secondly, if it is body corporate, you can only up to 100% of the net worth you can remit outside. So when we are talking of a merger of an Indian company with a foreign company, and the shares that you get from the foreign company by virtue of this merger or amalgamation will be subject to the ceiling. I am again friends, we have yet to see the guidelines which RBI will come out with. I am just throwing the current legislative, the problems of the gaps. I am only throwing some thoughts on that. So now take an example. Now let's take a little ridiculous example on this. Take an example of Hindustan Lever. These are thousands of shareholders. If this company merges into Unilever PLC, so the massive operations of Hindustan Lever currently in India, properties, brands, business, manufacturing, marketing, everything will get converted into a branch office of Unilever PLC. Thousands of shareholders who are holding shares, definitely more than $75,000. What would happen to that? So RBI will have to one way is that every individual will have to go to RBI and take permission, or company will have to apply, say that look, allow blanket permission up to $75,000, and beyond that let individuals apply whatever. For corporates who are the shareholders in Hindustan Lever, it will be 100% of their net worth, fine. But this will have to be scrutinized. So RBI will have to, it will be a nightmare for really a company like large company to really merge into. Now,
in fact, that will also not be possible because 75,000 a year.
Yeah.
So if somebody has remitted already, that 75,000 is
limit is gone, limit is exhausted. Now, take an example. Why would a foreign company want to do this? Let's test it from the other side. Again friends, we are just discussing and debating. I am not putting, don't take me so seriously and put any cases. I'm just trying, we are discussing over here as a professional body. All the MNCs here in India in the last couple of years, you must be reading in newspapers, they want to pay royalties, the subsidiaries. Now take an example where genuinely a merger takes place between an Indian subsidiary and it goes to the parent company and it becomes a branch office. So question of your royalty is nothing more arise. they will be, all profits will be their profits straight away. So they get out of all these requirements. They get out of SEBI listing requirement, they get out of all the disclosures and everything. Nothing will apply over here. So in a way, will it not benefit the MNCs who would like to take advantage of this? So we have to, again friends, this is to my mind, this provision is more because we have seen FDI regulations in the last 20 years. We have seen a lot of foreign collaborations, mergers, and there is a provision there are a lot of jurisdictions where cross-border mergers are allowed. So this is an enabling provision to my mind, and unless and until we see really the fine print, the devil will lie in the detail. So we have to see the provisions, what RBI comes out with, what SEBI comes out with, all these things, and then only fine. The third challenge on this foreign company merger is, what if we're talking of Hindustan Lever merger or any other merger, what if the country where the company is going to merge, that country requires, the law of that country requires a specific approval of that court, for example. So therefore the merger between the two, Indian company and the foreign company, will also be subject to compliance with the rules and regulations or law of that country. So that also we have to be abided. So unless we abide by those rules and regulations, so it will be subject to the pricing guidelines, subject to FEMA regulations, subject to regulatory authority, and subject to the regulations of the law of that country. So it's not that easy. To my mind, this is just an enabling provision as a put up for discussion purpose. Over a period of time, I guess, SEBI and government will come up with some law or some clarification, and we'll have some light at the end of the day. But still, for the discussion purpose, I would say this is a good starting point. At least there is an attempt, it has been provided that yes, you can do cross merger. Any questions on this? Yeah.
In India, is there anything really fast-track the fundamental side? Because I find physically the regulators, the administrators, everybody fighting with a distrust of business management. When you start with the synthetic drug is there, any amount of research state regulation, instead of getting and punishing the wrongdoers, they are creating laws whereby everybody is going to be everybody is going to be for this. This is the mindset. This is the mindset.
Anybody wants to comment on this?
And it's still under construction.
See, Nanipal Kiwala once had said, I think at the Churchgate or CCI, I think he had once said this, that the lawmakers in India don't make laws with positive mindset of making the law. We make law with a belief that if I was to make law on this, say, merger with foreign companies, I would not start with the thought process that yes, with a positive mindset that yes, I must provide a statutory framework, regulatory framework, whereby an Indian company should be permitted to merge in the foreign company. If that was my thought process, probably the law would be written in the positive language. My thought process would be, what if an Indian company tries to misuse this? Can he park funds abroad by doing this? Do he siphon off funds by doing this? My mindset starts probing into questions as to what can be the misuse. Then what I do is I list out those misuses. I sit and discuss with my colleagues. He adds on to those misuses. And then when I draft the regulation, I start with the premise that these regulations will be misused, and therefore I have to prepare a structure which is going to be foolproof to my thought. So when you read this, you will see the regulation is this cannot be done, or this is subject to prescribed law. This cannot be done, this is subject to regulation. This cannot be done, subject to guidelines. So you always find that the bureaucratic approach is that we'll wait and see. This provision which say that subject to prescribed law, regulations, guidelines is a wait and watch policy. They will see how people come out with. The minute they find some mistake, there will be regulations to plug up that hole. Now this is unfortunate. Now on a lighter note, I was discussing this very same issue with a very senior bureaucrat, and he gave me a very interesting answer to this. And he told me that unfortunately what happens is, say the issue has come up in Bombay, where the regulators or the officers have discussed this issue, and it goes to Delhi, where the say the deputy secretary or the secretary who is the lawmaking authority says he's a South Indian. So you have thought in your professional way there is other problems. What happens is, the person who thinks, I mean, this is nothing to do with any religion, caste or otherwise, but what happens is we think it differently, and when we write the language is our vernacular language. It's not the perfect English language. So therefore, if you see the classic example is you look at the old English, the existing Companies Act and look at the new Companies Act, you will see the vast difference in the language itself. Every person, see, a person of Odisha will write differently. A person of South Kerala will write differently. Tamil person will write differently. But he will write because he understands. He has learned English language differently. So what do you do? So this is also going to be an hazard. Now he may not want to be a negative writer. He may not want to write negatively, but it may just come out. But you are right. Honestly speaking, yes, we are currently, friends, we are living in an unfortunate era, or we are going through an unfortunate era where everything is looked up in suspicious. You go to courts, no matter whatever genuine matter you may have, the courts will look to suspicion. The income tax authorities, regulators will look to suspicion. Not only that, if you go home, you talk to your wife, she will look to your suspicion. When your wife talks to you, you will look to the suspicion. On the right side.
Even we make no suspicious talking to us.
Yes. So, suspicious behavior is becoming part of our day-to-day behavior or culture. Now, I guess, I have very hope on one aspect to answer your query. I am not given up, I am a very positive person. I strongly believe that we are in a, friends, you don't mind if you slightly diverge. This is diversion. What will happen is, I would like to believe that we are in a stage of evolution. Since 1991 onwards, we are evolving. See, we didn't have foreign equity in banking, we didn't have insurance. So all those sectors have got opened up. Suddenly you have seen in the GDP, almost 60% of the revenue comes from service sector. Service sector is completely new animal altogether. It is just expanding and growing like anything. So we are in a tremendous, we are like amoeba. Geography. Amoeba grows wherever there is a space. There is no shape for amoeba. So our economy and our behavior or our pattern of doing business is like amoeba. Wherever we see growth, we grow there. Now therefore you will find an erratic movements or shapeless economy or shapeless behavior. But information technology is going to put all these things in place. Why and how? Let me explain you. For example, the 2G spectrum issue, or just take a classic example of the sale of the natural resources of the government. We know that yes, in 2G we made mistake. We know that in mines we made mistake. So therefore the corrective process will be put. So there will be first mistake, there will be first not mistake but blunders, there will be errors, there will be frauds in the first instance. But the age of information technology, the 250 or 300 channels which are observing you, every minute, every sentence, you look at yesterday, one politician just made a statement that you just remove ink from second finger and you know how much of chaos it created. So information technology, the media and the media today is putting everything under transparent filters. So therefore a stage will come where all these things, basic issues will get, which will get ticked off. And at some time a stage will come where you will find everything more or less. Now for example the college education, some come into the online forms. You don't need to go to colleges and collect the forms, fill everything online. So in technology, information technology, the television channels, the press, the media, press, everything will have its own focus. 20-30 years back there was no such televisions. So I want to believe, I would like to believe that a time will come when technology and information technology and this kind of media is going to take a lot of corrective steps. It's not so easy today to commit a crime crime and hide it under the wraps. You see, the last 10 years, all those who amassed wealth are all behind bars. In the last 10 years, you see the new economy, the large corporations who amassed massive wealth, we don't need to name them, but all are behind bars. In how many years? Hardly 10 years of time. Okay. Does that answer your question? We have to have hope against hope. Okay. Now, for the first time, if you do a merger of a listed company to unlisted, section permits you to remain unlisted for some time. That's section 232. I'll do little fast because I would like to take some questions. Prohibition on treasury stock. Again, if you see couple of mergers in the last couple of years, where virtually every merger, it is becoming a norm that every merger where there is a cross shareholding, people want to put those shares in treasury stock so that they can make some more money and distribute to the shareholders. It was nothing wrong in that. It was again an innovative scheme to take advantage of the merger, to my mind. So again, that is being stopped by the regulators. So you can't have shares in treasury stocks. Minorities, this is a new provision which has come out. If you hold 90% or more of the share capital of any company by virtue of amalgamation, share exchange, or for any other reason, if you go beyond 90%, you could squeeze the minority. But again, the challenge over there is, it says at a price determined on the basis of valuation by registered value in accordance with the rules as they be prescribed. So we have to again wait for the SEBI rules what comes out, because it's not going to be simple. So any squeeze out, any acquisition of minority shareholder is going to be subject to the regulations. Now, under 230, this was not the earlier, but when you go through the process of merger or amalgamation, if the tribunal feels that minority shareholders needs to be protected or needs to be given an exit, the tribunal could insist on the promoters of the company that you must give exit to the minority shareholders. This is a very interesting provision, the threshold objection. Earlier any shareholder could go to the High Court and file an objection, challenge this scheme of amalgamation or merger. Now today, unless you are holding not less than 10% shareholding or have outstanding debt or not less than 5% total outstanding debt, you can't file an objection to the scheme. Now, I don't know whether SEBI will like this, because SEBI always wants a minority shareholder to object to the scheme, or SEBI wants protection of the minority shareholder. Now friends, this minority protection, I have very specific say on this, and I have been very vocal on this. Yes, minority shareholders needs protection, is fine. But look at the minority shareholder, or look at, again, I am not a pro-promoter, I want to look at very objectively to this situation. When you announce a merger or amalgamation to which a minority shareholder is objecting, assuming he is objecting and it is a valid objection, what would happen? Post-merger, he has the first opportunity to sell off the shares. The first person to sell because of the merger or amalgamation would be the minority shareholder. The promoter shares are locked in, first of all. He cannot sell shares of the company because of merger or amalgamation. So therefore, what is the benefit? Within the minority shareholder who has objected to the scheme, fights tooth and nail, believe me, fights tooth and nail and objects to the scheme, and the scheme is objected, cancelled. Assuming it is cancelled and thrown in the dustbin basket, next day that minority shareholder sells off and walks out from the company. Whose benefit has the scheme been cancelled? Who has benefited? Means the law provided the minority shareholder should have a lock-in if he objected to the scheme, and if he is not allowing. A majority who is passing the scheme, a minority shareholder is objecting, and the court of SEBI says that yes, the objection of the minority shareholder is to be heard. I'll just come back to that very interesting provision. I want to talk something more on this SEBI circular. See, this SEBI circular of 4th February, this was subsequently modified in May. In nutshell, let me explain what the provision SEBI wanted to do. SEBI wanted to introduce a concept. Friends, I'll tell you, I could not have, I have written on this, in fact, on the very issue, that this was illegal provision. This was patently illegal provision issued by SEBI. What did it say? It said that once you, the steps, you go to stock exchange, file a draft scheme. Stock exchange then receives comments from various shareholders and passes on the scheme to SEBI. SEBI then gives observation letter and you go back to the company. And then company goes to the High Court and files a scheme. SEBI wanted in that earlier resolution, earlier notification, SEBI said that it will be passed, you have to provide in the scheme a provision to state that out of the minority shareholders, hear me carefully friends, out of the minority shareholders, people who have objected to the scheme, identify them, and you must get twice the number from those minority shareholders in support of the scheme. Only then the scheme will go through. Friends, you will not believe me because I think I should read out that provision. To what extent can SEBI go? It is 5.16 of the first circular. I will read out. Approval of the shareholders to scheme through postal ballot and e-voting. Listed company shall ensure that the scheme submitted with the Honorable High Court for sanction provides for obtaining shareholders approval through special resolution passed through postal ballot and e-voting after disclosure of all material facts in the explanatory statement sent to the shareholders in relation to such resolution. This first part is illegal. Because under the High Court, under section 391, all that the law requires is majority in number and 3/4 in value. And SEBI is saying, I want to pass a special resolution. What should I do? Section requires me majority in number, 3/4 in value. And SEBI is saying, pass special resolution. So this is contradictory, number one. Now comes the interesting part. The scheme shall also provide that the special resolution shall be acted upon only if the votes cast by public shareholders in favor of the proposal amount to at least 2 times the number of votes cast by public shareholders against it. So imagine a situation, you are 75% promoter shareholder in the company. You have sworn for generations and raised the company. And you propose a merger or amalgamation. You go to the High Court, majority in number, 3/4 in value, all creditors, everyone has approved, High Court has put a stamp, everything is done and sealed. And you are ready. And now comes the provision that look, but the scheme has to provide that this special resolution shall not be acted upon. You cannot act upon this scheme unless you find out from the public shareholders whether the votes cast are twice or not. What are you proposing? You are proposing that forget the High Court, forget the shareholders, forget the creditors, forget everyone. After the scheme is sanctioned, you have to have a provision which says that I will identify from the public shareholder whether there are twice number have voted, the twice positive votes are voted against the negative votes. Is this provision illegal? Was this to stand? This was an illegal provision because this was complete contrary to the Companies Act. So immediately SEBI, when people raised these issues, SEBI came up with a suggestion that this 516 is modified. Let's modify this 516. Now what is the modified 516, this provision? They are saying, such scheme shall provide that the scheme shall be acted upon only if the votes cast in the votes cast by the public shareholder in favor of the promoter are more than twice. Now which cases they are saying where if the scheme allots additional shares to the promoters, or if it is a scheme which involves a listed company and the promoter companies, which means they are saying that if there is a related party transaction in a scheme of arrangement, or if the promoters are getting undue advantage, then we go to this. To my mind, friends, again this is not illegal, but this is not correct. The reason for this is, if I was to issue additional shares to the minority shareholders, then what happens? Then will the minority shareholders stay away from the resolution? It is just because the promoters are getting some additional shares, or the promoter entity are getting merged, will you give a veto? It is like giving a veto right to the minority shareholders. Anyway, so this is the provision of law as on today. So if any scheme of arrangement or amalgamation is giving any benefit to the, not benefit, but if it is getting allotted any shares to the promoters, then this provision will apply. I have covered this. Yeah. I am open to questions, friends, on this. Yeah. It will depend upon the merger. It will, you see, if you really allow an Indian company to merge with the foreign company will be more committed. it will be less scrutinized, it will not be subject to a lot of regulatory regime. Well, at least we have to assume that. Of course, as I said, this is only an elected provision, so we don't know what is there up in the sleeve with SEBI or government. I have tried to just capture the basic gist or basic issues arising out of these two chapters, and there will be still lot, friends, to discuss and deliberate. In the paucity of time, what I have tried to do is I have tried to just catch up those on issues which are new concepts and which will have to deliberate a lot, I guess, over a period of time, and see how regulators react on this and how jurisprudence react on this.
Can there be a dual voting? Shareholder votes through a postal ballot also and a court-directed meeting.
No, there can't be dual voting. I guess what SEBI will to say here is that when a meeting is convened of the shareholders, whoever present physically are present, they will vote physically, and whoever don't want to physically vote, they will vote through postal ballot. So it will be counted only one.
How the track will be kept? It's very difficult.
You have to track that. You have to evaluate a situation system where it will be tracked. Any questions, sir? Sujal, any question? I have not spoken about valuations because there is nothing on valuation as such, and you all stand protected by the Supreme Court judgment of Tamco Liver. And it's a very interesting judgment on valuation. So long as the judgment remains, as far as valuation is concerned, you will always be protected. Yeah, it's a landmark judgment, and what I will do is, instead of explaining, I will just read out to you. It's a very interesting para. I will read out to you just 4-5 lines from Supreme Court, and we should constantly, pose these 4-5 lines to SEBI, always if they talk of anything on valuation. I'll give citation. It's a very interesting, very famous region. Tamco was a HLL reported in 1994, 4 company law journal, but if you just go to Google, you will get the judgment. I'll read out to you, friends, and this will be very happening to you. It says, the jurisdiction of this was the case where valuation was severely challenged, right up to Supreme Court. It was a Tamco merging with HLL. The Supreme Court observes, the jurisdiction of the court in sanctioning any merger is not to ascertain with mathematical accuracy whether the valuation satisfies the arithmetical test. A company court does not exercise an appellate jurisdiction. It is not required to interfere only because the figures arrived at by the valuer was not a better as it would have been if another method would have been adopted. So you are free to adopt any method. What is imperative is that such determination should not have been contrary to the law and that it was not unfair to the shareholders of the company which was being merged. The court's obligation is to be satisfied that valuation was in accordance with law and it was carried out by an independent body. Now comes the important question. Certainly it is not the part of the judicial process to examine the entrepreneurial activities to ferret out flaws. The court is least equipped for such oversights. What could be more candid assertion by the court? The Supreme Court is saying we are not equipped. We are not competent to comment upon this. The court is least equipped for such oversights, nor indeed it is a function of the judges in our constitutional scheme. We do not think that the internal management, business activity or institutional operation of public bodies can be subjected to inspection by the court. To do so is incompetent and improper and therefore out of bounds. What more can be the clarity on the issue? Supreme Court has time and again said valuation is something which I will never interfere. We are not competent to do that valuation. Every valuer will look to the valuation differently. If you adopt different methods, it will be different methodology. And subsequently in Neo Mafatwal judgment also Supreme Court has said that we will only see whether the rules are followed correctly or not. We are not here to see how the game is being played of cricket. That's the Supreme Court. So to my mind, valuation will always remain in the realm of your exclusive authority. I don't think so. See, SEBI may say whatever I am telling you, whatever they may say. unless they come out with a suggestion, and this is what I have also recommended them when they came out with the last SEBI guidelines. I said, if you really feel so scared, or if you really doubt the promoters on valuation, you have your own panel of valuers. Like when you go for liquidation of a company, the liquidator has its own panel of auditors, and your company is anyway audited by liquidators panel. So SEBI should also have their own panel of valuers, and let them also value the company. So you come with your valuation, SEBI comes with their valuation, and then let the company and the shareholder decide what valuation has to be adopted. You can't sit there and question it, friends. Later when I always say that, under the listing agreement, within 15 minutes of the board meeting, you are supposed to inform the stock exchange. Whatever happens. I always tell this, I don't record this. I always say that a time will come when SEBI will say whole board meeting in my office, or whole board meeting in Bombay Stock Exchange, and keep open your decision making to public. Thank you, friends.
Would you like to just take some questions?
I thought questions are over.
Thank you, Nitin bhai, for a wonderful exposition of the law, provisions of the law, also giving the insight of the concepts and the practical aspects. Friends, Nitin bhai in the beginning started with change legislations like MRTP and FERA and FEMA and whatnot, and he stopped to the Companies Act. Further, probably we have DTC coming in place of income tax, GST coming in place of indirect taxes, and also IFRS, which may change the accounting concepts and auditing standards. In my office, in my office, when my article student does not succeed in the exams, I tell them that don't worry, even if I give exams to the CAs, I will also not success. My honest confession, they take it as a consolation. With these few words, I would request Nitin to give a very, very little vote of thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. Friends, we will all agree that Mr. Nitin Poddar is really an authority on this merger acquisitions, the way he has presented and the way he has casted the doubts which are going to come and the difficulties which we are going to face in the near future when this law becomes applicable and we go to NCLT. Right now we have a process of dispensing with the meeting, but then it looks like that all meetings are going to be really compulsory.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And he has really taken us through this new concept which is going to rise in a very methodical and also touching upon the other acts which are going to affect this. With this word, I propose a hearty vote of thanks to him and propose with a loud applause.
Things are changing so fast.
उसके पास रख दीजिए उसकी एक फोटो कॉपी रख दीजिएगा तो वो मेरे पास हम कलेक्ट कर लेंगे कितने बजे लोगों को